Hello and welcome to Pockenrop, and this is part 2 of my ranking of Paul McCartney's solo career. This will be items 20 through to 11. If you haven't seen 28 through to 21, I urge you go back and watch that video first, because there's a few bits and pieces that I put in the intro that apply here as well, which is the information about the ranking engine. But let's dive straight in at number 20, McCartney II. Easily his most experimental release under his own name. And I blow hot and cold on this album. There were times when I've listened to it and I thought, gosh, I love that. And other times I've listened to it and thought, what on earth was I thinking last time I listened to it? There's some great stuff on here. Coming Up is a superb song. One of These Days is a lovely closer to the album. The rest in between is a bit of a roller coaster. It has Waterfalls, which is a lovely ballad, a little bit too slow. And it's got one of his most forgettable commercially released pieces, Front Parlour. To this day, having heard this back in 1988 for the first time, I still cannot hum Front Parlour. I must have heard it dozens of times and I don't know the tune. It just doesn't stick. McCartney II is my least favourite of the trilogy that we now have of the McCartney albums. And I've placed it at number 20. At 19... I have placed London Town by Wings. So Wings ended up as a three-piece once again, with the departure of Jimmy McCulloch and Joe English partway through recording. They do appear on here, but in the case of Jimmy McCulloch, it's hard to work out where. There's very little of the rock band that Wings could be on this album. I've Had Enough is pretty much the sole representation. Maybe Cafe on the Left Bank. There were some good songs on here. I do like Famous Groupies. I really like the aforementioned I've Had Enough. With a Little Luck is a lovely single, a proper full-on great pop masterpiece when you listen to it. Got quite a few co-writes with Denny Laine. This is probably his biggest contribution into Wings. But the big problem with the album is the fact that it's well over 50 minutes. And vinyl really shouldn't go above more than 23, 24 minutes per side, because the grids get kind of sandwiched together a lot closer and the needle doesn't sit as well. And as a result, the fidelity of this album is poor. There's too much on it. And it could have stood losing a few tracks. In my view, the one it could have lost most would have been Girlfriend. Now, Paul McCartney's song was written for Michael Jackson, who later covered it, and I hate both versions of it. I think it's an awful song. I know other people who think it's a 5-star track, but I detest Girlfriend, and it drags London Town more down this list than anything else, including the fidelity of the sound. I want an archive on this. I'd love to see what they do with the vinyl archive, whether they do as they've done with Flaming Pie and put it over to 2 discs, maybe do a half-speed master. It might transform how you view the album, including me. But yeah, 1978's London Town sits here at position 19. Position 18 is filled by possibly his second most experimental release under his own name, Press to Play. So this got some positive critical notices, but it didn't really performed that well commercially. The singles did poorly, and I can't help thinking that was partly due to the lead-off single Press, which is awful. Oklahoma was never like this. What the hell does that mean? And there's some terrible vocals in it. I don't think it's produced well by Hugh Padgham, who's done perfectly great albums with The Police, with Phil Collins, but I don't think served Paul well. They didn't get on, according to the stories. And whilst there's real quality in here, Stranglehold is a superb track. Footprints is beautiful. Only Love Remains, I think, is his most underrated ballad. And side 2's got Move Over Busker, which is great fun. Angry, which I personally really like. And I would like to hear more of Paul doing a little bit of that what the hell gives you the right to tell me what to do with my life type stuff. But there's too many tracks on here that don't quite hit the mark. But they are him pushing the boundaries. When this was released, it's a 10-track vinyl album, if you can see that. It was also joining the CD age, and so the CD version actually had 13 tracks. I'm judging it based on the vinyl 10 track. That is what I think is the true album. Had those 3 CD tracks been included, it might have nudged a little higher. And it'll be interesting to see if he ever does an archive of Press to Play, which I really hope he does, whether he considers the album to be this or the CD version. Those 3 tracks were B-sides on the singles, so I think it's this. Which is a shame, because those 3 tracks enhance the album quite a bit. So sadly, and I say sadly, Press to Play comes in at number 18 for me. At number 17, I do own it, but I don't have the case to show you. I have placed his 1993 album, the follow-up to Flowers in the Dirt, Off the Ground. This is another album that, like, if you've watched my previous video, makes me a bit angry, like Rose Speedway does. And that's because he had a whole album's worth of additional material that became part of something called the Off the Ground, the Complete Works. So these were B-sides from this section, most of which outstrips what's on the original album. Now the album has got some good stuff on it. The title track, Off the Ground, is great. The single, Hope of Deliverance, got into the top 20, is also really good. I personally love Get Out of My Way. I think it's probably the best thing on the album. And there's a couple of Costello co-writes that were left over from the sessions pre-Flowers in the Dirt. So you've got The Lovers That Never Were, which might be one of Paul's very best songs, and Mistress and Maid, which I really like the song. I don't like his vocal delivery on the actual, this version we've got. The demo version from the Flowers in the Dirt archive is way better. But there's so much other on the album that just isn't quite right. It was recorded as live, and I don't think that quite serves the music as well as it could do. Another one that I'm jonesing for an archive for. It's got to come. There is so much material, and those tracks that are on Complete Works are superb. So Off the Ground, I'm afraid, only makes my number 17. At number 16, I may have placed a controversial choice. Some of you think I shouldn't include this because it's not under the name of Paul McCartney, but I have included Electric Arguments by the Fireman. So the Fireman is a duo of McCartney and his producer for this album, which is Youth, from the band Killing Joke. They had done 2 previous albums, which I have never listened to because ambient music isn't my type of thing. But I have listened to Electric Arguments. Once again, we have an album of 2 halves, and in this case, literally 2 albums. This is the double vinyl. The first 8 tracks are almost a McCartney album as we'd know it. There is some superb stuff on here. You've got Highway, Sing the Changes, there is Light from Your Lighthouse, 2 Blackbirds, 2 Magpies, which is a lovely ballad. It's not my favourite vocal style because that's what he uses later on in 2012, the next album after, which is the Kisses on the Bottom. See the previous video to see where I put that. But Electric Arguments, those first 8 tracks are a killer album. The second half of the album is much more of the ambient type stuff, and I've got a feeling he's going to stay mint. That I'll play disc 1 of this and not disc 2. I got this for Christmas. But Electric Arguments has been a bit of an eye-opener to me, and it's effectively landed pretty much slap bang in the middle of my list, where it comes at number 16. It couldn't be much closer to the middle, so it kind of pretty much represents great McCartney and the kind of McCartney stuff I'm not interested in. So it's the perfect album for straddling the midpoint. I didn't plan that. Moving on to number 15, I have placed Memory Almost Full. So this is the 2 CD long box version with all the fold out bits and pieces that make it quite a pain to open. It was released on Hear Music, which is Starbucks label. He just switched labels for that. Memory Almost Full there's some superb material on here. And in some ways I feel a bit guilty placing it as low as I do. So this, as I say, it's number 15. The reason it's as low as it is because the production is horrible. I mean, proper horrible. I I have heard a version of a decent needle drop on the vinyl where this is kind of like brick wall style production from David Kahn, who did Driving Rain, and it becomes exhausting to listen to. It's not a long album, but it's this needs a massive remastering, a serious remastering to get the best out of it. Because when I've heard the vinyl version, it's been so much better. But I have to rate on what I got and what I listen to regularly. That said, there's some good songs on here. Ever Present Past is superb. See Your Sunshine, I think, might be one of his best summary type songs, and he's done a lot of summary based songs. Mr. Bellamy's the pick of the bunch. Such an odd song. I mean, I could hear Wings doing that. It seems to be about a cat, most people seem to think, stuck up a tree. Mr. Bellamy's great. But it's got some songs I really can't stand. I can't stand Nod Your Head. Paul plays every instrument on it, and he's done that so many times in his career, but rarely as badly as I think he has on here. And his vocal is awful. And he released it as a single. I just don't get it. And then there's the nadir of the album, which is Gratitude. Now, I can't stand Gratitude, but when I've heard that needle drop version of vinyl, even Gratitude is better than I remember it being on here. It's the production that lets the album down big time. It could be, I mean, the material on here is good, but it could be so much better. And I want a version that's remastered and shows it off properly. So that is my number 15, Memory Almost Full. At number 14, I have found myself placing an album that I, at one point, used to think was my favourite Wings album, Back to the Egg. It's a problematic album when you really listen to it. It's got the two Rochester tracks, both of which feel out of context. There are two, and they're back to back, there are two double tracks. So Winter Rose, Love Awake, and After the Ball, Million Miles. And they're one after each other on the album, and you kind of think, why? Split them apart. And in fact, actually split the songs. Love Awake is tremendous, deserves to stand on its own. And in fact, I created a version of this called Back to the Egg Hard Boiled Edition, where I did exactly that. I separated the tracks. I've never liked Million Miles. I found out that there are outtake tracks that are like Cage, which could have been on here, nearly was. It was left off for Baby's Request, which I love. But why was it left off instead of something like The Broadcast? Or maybe Spin It On or To You, which aren't great. They're fun, but they're lyrically poor. I don't understand what McCartney was trying to do with this album quite, and that's why I want an archive for it. The material, I think, is there's some top-notch stuff on here. One thing I haven't mentioned and that's Denny's contribution of Again and Again and Again. His greatest song for me in everything that he did with Wings. I think Again and Again and Again is an absolutely masterful song. Apparently it was two songs, and Paul suggested he put the two together. I'm glad he did, because I think it's the best track on the whole album. And that includes my love for Getting Closer. Again and Again and Again is a great song. I would have liked to have had a Weep for Love on here as well. But yeah, number 14, it's the last one of the top half, effectively, Back to the Egg. Number 13, sometimes referred to as unlucky for some, and there is something unlucky on here. Wings at the Speed of Sound. Rush recorded in between the Wings Over the World before the Wings Over America tours. Democratic album. Everybody sings a song on here with varying results. So it contains two mega smash singles of Let 'Em In and Silly Love Songs, both of which are wonderful. Let's be honest. I mean, Let 'Em In's not got much to it, but it's a great song. Beware My Love is a fantastic Wings rock number, particularly on the live triple album Wings Over America. It really shines when it's done live. She's My Baby, I adore. I think that's a lovely, cute song. There's another Denny Lane song on here called Time to Hide, which is almost as good as Again and Again and Again, in terms of just songs he wrote on his own. You've got Joe English singing Must Do Something About It, which I think is a brilliant song. I would love to have heard Paul do it, I must admit, but Joe sings the heart out of it. It's a great vocal from him. There is Warm and Beautiful, which is a beautiful ballad and really stands on its own. If you ever listen to Working Classical, it was one of the songs that was turned into a string quartet thing for the Linda McCartney Memorial, and its melody shines. It's beautiful. But there's the poor stuff on here. Now, I have never liked the Note You Never Wrote. No offence to Denny's vocal, I think his vocal is perfectly fine, but the song I think is a weak song. San Ferian is fine, it's just there. But there is possibly the worst thing that Wings commercially released, of a song anyway. I mean, it's vying with Loop as being absolutely terrible. And it's Cook of the House, which I'm afraid Linda sings. Cook of the House is awful, and it stops Wings at the Speed of Sound being better. If that had been pulled, I think Wings at the Speed of Sound would be viewed higher, but it wouldn't be as democratic. It would be, well, why everybody else and not Linda? And she can sing better than this. I Am Your Singer off Wildlife is better sung, and Seaside Woman, the single that came about a year later as Susie and the Red Stripes, is much, much better sung. Cook of the House just doesn't cut it. It's a horrible song. Yeah, I've heard Wings at the Speed of Sound being described as less than the sum of its parts, and I think that's about right. It's a shame. There's much to love, but there's too much to detest, and that's where the contrasts come in. Wings at the Speed of Sound, number 13. Now, at number 11, I've placed something that I know for some people would possibly be their greatest Paul McCartney album of all time. But personally, I'm not that fond of it, and it's Flaming Pie. This is the archive edition. It does improve. This came out in '97 after he'd been reinvigorated by the Beatles anthology series. He got back to writing songs the way he used to in the Beatles a little bit. He reinvented himself in terms of songcraft. But it's an album that, for me, feels a bit flat. I want a vinyl version. I would like that half-speed master vinyl when I'm prepared to pay the price. In terms of what's on here, there's some great tracks. Young Boy was a good single. The World Tonight. Beautiful Night I feel like I should like more than I do, if that makes sense. But there's a clutch of acoustic-driven tracks that are really, really good, and makes me want Paul to do just an acoustic album one day. So Some Days, I love Some Days. There is Little Willow, Calico Skies, which is a great song. I love Heaven on Sunday. But unfortunately, these are packaged alongside something like Really Love You, which is a jam with Ringo Starr, and that could go, and the album would rise, in my view. And also Used to Be Bad, which is another jam track that he did with Steve Miller this time, and again, that could go. If both of those go, and you end up with this 12-track instead of 14-track album, Flaming Pie immediately would become a top tenner for me. It comes across as uneven. It's good, but for me, it isn't great. And so, number 12, Flaming Pie. And finally, in this video, we need to look at number 11, and I'm going to get some potential flames for this. Because at number 11, I have placed Red Rose Speedway. Yes, I have included Red Rose Speedway in this list twice. Now, you've heard if you watched the first video, you'll have heard what I think of the original as-released Red Rose Speedway. That is mediocre. This is the acetate double vinyl that he released in 2018 and was how Red Rose Speedway was scheduled to be released. It's a great album. And that's the thing. But I remember, if you watched the first video, you'd have heard me say that Red Rose Speedway makes me angry. Because this is what it could have been. There were another 9 tracks on the Red Rose Speedway double album that were not included on the original as released album. So we gain I Lie Around, we get Country Dreamer, both of which were B-sides in '73. We gain a cover version of Tragedy, which is one of Paul's best covers ever, and was never released until 2018. 45 years we had to wait for Tragedy to formally be released. We've got Mama's Little Girl. Man, what a song. Finally became a B-side in 1989 on the B-side of Put It There. How was he keeping that in the locker? Mama's Little Girl should have been on the original Red Rose Speedway, and that's what bugs me about the original album. The 9 or so additional tracks that are on this, compared to the 9 we have on the original album, kick its butt. Even Seaside Woman. Seaside Woman is so much better than Loop, and indeed the medley. We do get Loop and medley on here, which is why it's not top 10. But this could have been a classic album for Paul McCartney, and the record company wrecked it. I love my double vinyl Red Rose Speedway. I've placed it at number 11, and who knows what we could have ended up with from this band, from this version of Wings, if he'd been allowed to release the rocking, cracking album that this album was, instead of what mediocre thing we got. Oh, got 'em cross. Red Rose Speedway, the double acetate version, is my number 11. So that concludes this video. You'll probably disagree with me on where I've ranked some of these things. You'll probably have a go at me in the comments about the fact that I've included this particular prized album of mine. If you do, have a go in the comments below. Be nice. Thank you very much for watching. Remember to like this video, click subscribe, click the bell to get notifications of subsequent videos, including part 3 of this rundown where you hear what my top 10 is. But until then, thank you for watching Pockenrop, and goodbye.